Since its discovery, fire has been used for many different purposes, from heat, light and cooking, to a sign of celebration or communication. Whereas it has been a source of fear to almost all other living things on the planet, fire, aside from its practical uses, has also provided a great fascination to human beings. In Northern Ireland in particular, we have a long history of creating large fires called bonfires, using them for specific, significant events. In some cases, they are used to celebrate events in popular Western culture, such as Halloween, but mostly they are used to commemorate historical or political events, significant to different sections in our community. The main bonfires are the 11th night bonfires, each July, created within the Protestant Loyalist community to signify the beginning of the 12th of July celebrations, which commemorate the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. Precisely 1 month later, the 11th of August bonfires are used to commemorate the relief of Londonderry after the siege of 1688-89. The Reverend John Mackenzie, a churchman who ministered in the city during the siege, commented that
there was no sleep for the remainder of the night, either within or without the walls. The bonfires that blazed along the whole circuit of the walls told of the joy within the town.
More recently, bonfires have also been used by the Catholic nationalist community to commemorate the start of the Feast of the Assumption on the 15th of August, or the introduction of internment during the recent Troubles on the night of the 8th of August. In the past, bonfires were seen as cultural and social occasions, but in certain areas they are now viewed as antisocial flashpoints, devoid of any real cultural links. Some bonfires are now creating conflict, and the positioning, makeup and size can sometimes be seen as intimidating to local communities, and the influence of paramilitary groups is evident in many areas. In some areas, bonfires have also proved to be a distraction from boredom and attract gangs of young people, thus becoming an outlet for antisocial behaviour. This seems to be a relatively modern perception, but a look at the history of the bonfire shows that it is not really the case. Historical references to the bonfire or Bain fire show that bonfires have a long tradition, even stretching back before Christ into pagan times. References to such blazes are also to be found in the Middle Ages, with possibly the first written reference to such a fire, Banfire Igneus Ossium, dating back to 1483. On the headland above Port Braddon, near White Park Bay on the North Antrim coast, lie the ruins of Temple Stra Church, or in translation, Lesaire's Church. Lesaire was an ancient Celtic fire goddess, worshipped as a goddess of fertility, fire as something which has vitality and ultimately is life-giving. Fire was also a symbol of virility and fertility, as young men would perform rites testing themselves against the fire, jumping through the flames. Events like these would be held on the solstices, Halloween, or May Eve, and in doing this they believed that they would ensure the continuation of their community in the years to come. The bonfire became a symbol of strength and hope in many of these early societies and communities. Bonfires were a familiar sight in winter through these times in history, as many ancient peoples were convinced that with the onset of winter that the sun was dying. To counteract this, they lit great fires to try to revitalise it. A symbol and tradition of one of these ancient practices still remains with us today in the form of the Yule log. The bonfire was also seen and used as a means of purification and protection by ancient peoples, such as the Celts. They burned great fires in order to ward off demons, particularly those demons associated with sickness and disease. Despite the ceremonial nature of the bonfire, there was a practical aspect to them also, as they were used to burn anything that might have been deemed contaminated from those who had died from disease, which was rife due to a lack of hygiene. Using the bones of dead animals, they would also burn the clothes and bedding of those who had recently died from disease as a means of destroying anything that may have been contaminated. These fires may also have included the bodies of the deceased as well. This is the origin of the name bonfire, the fire of bones. Amongst a number of ancient peoples, including the Celts, it was sometimes customary to dispose of one's enemies by burning them. In some Celtic societies, the actions of killing one's foes and offering them up as sacrifices to the gods through time became intertwined with the practice of the Celts constructing a great figure in the shape of a man which was then set alight. This construction was known as the Wicker Man, and modern-day versions of this symbolic event still take place regularly in Scotland and Nevada, USA. During the Black Death in Britain and Europe around 1351, fires raged continuously as communities fought to contain and destroy the plague. Fire was seen as a symbol of purity and of cleansing, particularly in the medieval period. Even today, fire is often seen as a way of clearing away disease. During the recent foot-and-mouth epidemic, large numbers of cattle were burnt in the fields where they died as a means of limiting the spread of the disease, an ancient method of stopping contamination spreading across the land being employed in our modern world. Throughout time, wars have been fought and, prior to the advent of technology, fire played an important part in defensive strategy, with bonfires being used as signals between one location and another. By night the flames were visible for many miles. In 1588 fires were lit along the English coast to warn the people of the Spanish Armada's approach. Equally beneficial as a signal during the hours of daylight was the smoke that came from bonfires. Historical examples of this are recorded in Greece in the 3rd century BC, but were most likely used long before this. The Chinese on the Great Wall of China used smoke signals which were also famously used by Native American Indians. The notion of burning as a form of purifying society of its enemies was taken to a new level by the Church in Europe in the Middle Ages, which used it to punish anyone who disagreed with it or worked against their religious beliefs. In places like Germany, burning became the regular means of execution for religious heretics and alleged witches. In England and Ireland, burning was not the accepted method for the disposal of witches, although some did take place, witchcraft being treated as a felony. The alleged perpetrators were hanged. In England, death by burning became a practice in Tudor times, with Henry VIII burning Lutheran heretics for being Protestants, then burning Roman Catholics after he fell out with the Pope. His daughter Mary I was responsible for the burning of approximately 300 Protestants during her reign, including a group of 17 people from the town of Lewes in the south of England, who became known as the Lewes Martyrs. Another crime for which burning was the punishment was treason. Although it was not rigorously enforced, a number of traitors were burned at Tower Hill in London. This notion is most popularly connected today with the arch-traitor Guy Fawkes, who tried to kill the monarch James I in the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Guy Fawkes was not actually burned but hanged, drawn and quartered. Fawkes' death later inspired the idea of burning an effigy or dummy of traitors on bonfires, and this became popular in England during the 17th century. This tradition continues today and has spread across the world as flags, statements or effigies of certain politicians or individuals deemed to be traitors are burned in protest and defiance. In Northern Ireland, this practice is carried out by most bonfire builders and is illegal, although the law is rarely, if ever, enforced. The burning of Lundy, the effigy of a leading figure associated with the siege of Derry, as a traitor each December by the apprentice boys, draws large crowds to the city. In these examples, bonfires seem to attempt to retain their purifying aspect, getting rid of the evil and corruption which might threaten the very fabric of society, a perception which might still be in the very back of our collective mind. Of course, we live in Northern Ireland, so rather than take a philosophical view of these interpretations, we simply call them hate crimes. It has been argued that there is nothing as comforting as a good fire. Many people can agree that on a cold winter's evening there is something wonderful about drawing one's chair up to a good blaze in the grate and experiencing the light and heat from it. In many cases, in times gone by, the fire was the very centre of the home, and it was where the family gathered round, where food was cooked and where communal dialogue took place. From even very early times, fire was a symbol of safety and home. Religious leaders were not slow to realise this. In Irish Celtic ritual, for example, around Easter, when the winter fires were extinguished and the summer fires were lit, all hearths had to remain empty until the High King of Ireland lit his fire on the hill at Slane as a symbol of the revitalised community. Bonfires and hearth fires could then be lit, and this signalled the end of winter and the coming together of the Celtic community for spring. St. Patrick is said to have challenged this as a pagan concept by lighting the Easter fire early, and taking on the wrath of the High King's Druids, over whom he triumphed. This invested the idea of the fire with a Christian element and made it even more central to the notion of community. Bonfires were also the place that people could gather, particularly at night. The quasi-mystical idea of people gathered together around a brightly burning bonfire is still as potent today as it was back in medieval times. It gave a sense of solidarity and cohesion to the community, and in some parts of England, for instance, bonfires were burned in towns and villages to mark the culmination of special local fairs and markets. In Northern Ireland, this was also the case, although it is now used by political and religious factions to create a perception of solidarity amongst themselves, mostly to the exclusion of other social groups. This link between the communal fire and religion would also seem to have facilitated the perception of we ourselves alone. So the bonfire still marks a gathering place, but in Northern Ireland it is a gathering of a specific and exclusive kind. So the main aims of bonfire throughout history have been an ancient fertility and invigoration symbol, a means of purification in times of disease, a military device for warning of attack and for frightening enemies, a method of formal execution, a central focus for social and religious celebration. All of these ideas come together through the flames of the bonfire. Bonfires are one of the oldest and most potent symbols that we use to commemorate, especially within the context of Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, the bonfire has been allowed to become misunderstood and used at times here in Northern Ireland in a way it was never intended to be. The context of the bonfire is much wider than simply a central point for tribalised groups, and if we take the time to explore its cultural origins and uses, this becomes evident. As we have seen, the tradition of bonfire is a long established one, used at times all over the world for various reasons. All groupings here in Northern Ireland have gradually managed to demonise the original bonfire concept by changing the tone and style of the celebrations, but we are not the first to do this, and certainly not alone in clashing with authority. The town of Lewes in the south of England was the site of the burning to death of 17 Protestant martyrs who would not denounce their faith on the orders of Mary I. To accompany the annual 5th of November celebrations in the town, the Lewes martyrs were commemorated also. During the early years, the celebrations in Lewes were not planned well or even carried out annually, but when they were celebrated, they were more closely resembling riots than celebrations. The celebrations involved bonfires and also incorporated a remembrance of the burning of the Lewes martyrs by carrying 17 flaming torches, as well as effigies, initially of Guy Fawkes or Pope Paul V, which were burned on the bonfire. The enthusiasm for the celebrations ebbed and dipped from the 1640s until the 1820s, when large groups known as the Bonfire Boys started the celebrations again with fireworks and large bonfires. The subsequent years became rowdier and rowdier, causing riots which led to restrictions that saw the celebrations banned from the town completely. However, in 1850 they were allowed back to the high streets in Lewes, after negotiations between the authorities and the Bonfire Boys had created a set of rules that appeased both groups. The former riots became much more like organised processions, and that practice still continues today. The groups of Bonfire Boys formed themselves into separate societies, and in 1853 the first two societies, Cliff and Lewes Borough, were founded, with others following. Today there are still 7 active societies bringing between 50 to 70,000 people onto the streets of Lewes each 5th of November, and although there are restrictions in place, it is still a hard partying atmosphere that exists. A lot of the worst of the excessive antisocial and dangerous behaviour that we feel is a unique recent twist in our own circumstances here have been going on for centuries in Lewes, and was eventually sorted out through dialogue over many years by both the Lewes authorities and the Bonfire Boy societies. Our so-called hate crime laws regarding the burning of effigies and posters is given a more pragmatic and sympathetic approach in Lewes, where it is seen as a form of social conscience. Writer and historian Mike Jay informs us that
enemies of bonfire are paraded on effigy. Local councillors who have attempted to curtail the celebrations. Pigs' heads and riot helmets representing heavy-handed policing. Politicians who have attempted to make political capital out of deploring bonfire night. Slogans, banners, and causes that are trending the current political spectrum from left to right and back again are united in force and are dealt with on the bonfire. There are contentious issues here, but there is also a history within which they are all assimilated and which offers a continued raison d'etre. A motto, "We burn to remember," not only refers to the past, but in referring to the present, the following statement applies. No one is physically hurt by the burning of effigies or posters, mainly just deflated egos, and it is not the intention of the bonfire societies to hurt, but to use the fundamental right of freedom of speech, which must always be maintained.
So, we can see that these acts of symbolic burning have always been part of the bonfire ritual and the perceived right of the bonfire builders to pillory and ridicule individuals or policies as they see fit. A fiery form of social media, so to speak. What is clear, however, is that authorities in their ever-constant need to manage and control have always had problems with the bonfire concept. And bonfire builders have always had an inflated view of their rights with regard to rules and safety versus commemoration and spectacle. Add to this the perceived opinions on all sides as to what constitutes an acceptable level of freedom of speech, and we then enter the grey areas that are leading to a lot of our present problems. William Temple from the Fountain in Londonderry tells of the street fires that were burned there on the 11th night pre-1969. Numerous small bonfires lit at dusk on street junctions and watched by huge family-orientated crowds. They were controlled and fed with pre-collected wood by those who lived around them until about midnight, then doused with water before people went to bed. They were cleared away in the morning by the locals before the 12th parade began. This concept of the traditional bonfire has disappeared in the current era. The sight of massed youths building massive and dangerous bonfires near homes and property has become the dominating feature for the media and anti-bonfire politicians in our country. The persistent burning of toxic materials in bonfires is not, or ever was, part of any culture. So, would our solution here be to look at examining our own bonfires and assessing exactly what it is we are commemorating or celebrating? There will need to be some serious considerations and a need to self-regulate to conform with laws involving safety and the environment. The bonfire concept is very traditional. Although the summer pastime of young people knocking on doors of houses and businesses to collect for the bonfire throughout the school holidays has largely disappeared. It has been replaced by the Buy a Bonfire Society with forklift trucks and the humble pallet. Bonfire building sometimes involves massive structures, which in different circumstances could be hailed as engineering masterpieces. In the many areas that bonfires are wanted and cherished, consideration for the community and health and safety is a priority. Should we look at other forms of commemorating like festivals or beacons? Other places like Lewes have elevated the bonfire celebration to become a modern major tourist event celebrating culture, but this has taken time and compromises that are continual. Recent proposals sent to one local council for consideration suggested that the council, in their desire to manage and control the bonfires, would be best served by creating a bonfire festival similar to Lewes. They could create bonfire zones in areas that require them and work in partnership with the bonfire builders to improve delivery and safety. Derry City and Strabane District Council have supported bonfires like the Burning Temple and the new Return of the Phoenix recently, so a precedent has been set. Through this festival they could work closely with the bonfire builders and local community to ensure that clean burn material for the bonfires was used in areas that wanted this form of celebration and coordinate to make sure that it was delivered close to the celebration dates. This should create a position that any unauthorised materials could be removed from any bonfire, and this would be equal in all areas. It would make the clean-up easier and negate the sight of weeks of dumped materials around the bonfire sites guarded by young people, which sometimes leads to antisocial behaviour. Unscrupulous businesses, builders and garage owners have used the bonfire over the years as an excuse to dispose of sometimes dangerous waste materials on the cheap. This has not been managed well by statutory agencies, including the police, and has led to pollutants being released into the air. The future is unclear, but the bonfire tradition will continue. We all know that. The question must be, how do we go about making it work to our advantage and eliminating the negative issues and attitudes that only cause damage? For the tradition to continue and indeed prosper, attitudes and delivery need to be looked at carefully by all stakeholders and participants.